Okay, good morning to everyone. Let's get started. And thank you for being here on time. Even if yesterday evening there were beers and caipirinhas going on. So thank you for making the effort. And my name is Luca Belli. I work here at FGV Law School, where I'm a professor, and I'm also the coordinator of the Center for Technology and Society here at FGV. I have the great pleasure to be the moderator of this panel together with, from my left, Grace Bomu, that is the program manager at OSF. Right, that title is right. It's project head, sorry. Project head at Open Society Foundations. Laura Bierman, that is professor at Temple University, and also directress of this
Yes, the Institute for Law, Innovation and Technology.
the Institute for Law Innovation and Technology. Dirceu Santa Rosa, that is both a lawyer and the country lead for the International Association of Privacy Practitioners. And then last, but of course not least, Renata Avila, who is the CEO of the Open Knowledge Foundation and also a fellow at Stanford, right? Okay, wonderful. So before we get started with a good set of interesting presentations, some very initial remarks that I wanted to share based on a couple of works we have been dealing with. One of them was also funded by the Open Society Foundations. This one on smart cities, we also discussed yesterday in a panel on smart cities. So I would like to give a couple of examples of what in practice is digital transformation, the problem we have, the solution we may have, and how actually it all leads to data governance or data usage or data extraction at some point. Let's start with a couple of examples here from Brazil, both in with regard to smart cities and national policies. Then we will have Dirceu being much more into detail in the second part of the presentations, and also some examples from this project that is called cyberbricks.info. Sorry for the format, because this is evidently an older version of PPT, but so everything we have done in the project is available for free on cyberbricks.info, and it is about digital governance and digital policies in the Brics countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So the three main points that I think converge all into data governance are connectivity, data protection, and cybersecurity. Why connectivity has to deal with data protection? And well, that is actually the reason why I got very interested into data protection something like 6 or 7 years ago, when I started understanding that most of the internet access in the global south, and also in many global north countries, is not really internet access. It's primarily access to a limited set of applications that are sponsored, so-called zero-rating apps, zero-rating schemes, where a very limited number of typically social networks are sponsored. And so internet access in the global south, it's not really internet access, it's more access to a very limited number, usually the same dominant social networks, right? Here you see, for example, the screenshots from the three main operators in Brazil. They all sponsor WhatsApp, typically also Facebook or Instagram, and a couple of other vertically integrated applications. What is the result of this? It's not showing? It's not showing here. It's not showing here. You have it on the screens there, but it's not showing here. Yeah, I think you can watch it. You can look at the presentation there. Thank you. But you can look at the presentation there on that screen, and not, unfortunately, not on this screen behind. So while we try to solve this, we might. I think we can even stay without maybe the screen here, and if I think everyone can. Acho que todo mundo pode olhar naquela outra tela. Não, se for rápido, colocar aqui, tá. Então vamos deixar isso aqui, tá? Vamos separar. So sorry. Sorry for the little. Desculpa, agora parou de funcionar a tela lá. Sorry for the little technical problem. Agora parou de funcionar. Tá bom, perfeito. So what is the result of this kind of policies that in Brazil, for example, you have that those are concrete data. 90%, 95% of the population primarily uses data, internet access plans with this kind of sponsored apps, and the result is that 95% of the population uses this kind of apps. So what is the practical result? It means that the data of 95% of the population are all collected by 2 or 3 apps, and if the startup innovators or anyone wants to create new applications, there is an evident barrier to enter into the market, because if you are not sponsored, it's much more difficult, because everyone mainly uses zero-rated application. You might have heard last year there was this Facebook incident that basically stopped the entire Brazilian economy and society working for one day. Or again, when there was the WhatsApp terms of service update, there was a session about this yesterday. There were countries like India, and I will mention this in the next slide, where people moved out of WhatsApp because they didn't like the new version of the terms of service. And most other countries, especially in the global south, people simply accepted them, not because of some sort of privacy paradox. People don't care about their privacy, simply because they didn't have any other choice. The transaction cost of using Signal, which is a much more privacy-enhancing technology, was extremely high, because you have to pay access on one hand, and the other hand, it's sponsored. So that this kind of access policies are having a direct impact into data concentration, and also the true concrete enjoyment of data protection, data privacy for billions of individuals. Now, here is the case of India, where these practices were banned in 2016. And actually, you see that in the 3 years after that, the number of subscriptions more than doubled, well, almost doubled. The consumption of gigabyte increased almost 30-fold, and the price of the gigabyte decrease of almost 95%. It's 150 rupees against 6.98 rupees. So it is interesting to see that actually this kind of when other policies are possible, especially in large markets, where it is possible to have new entrants. Like this in India was the result of the entrance of Reliance Jio. They started to offer very cheap internet access to everyone. So getting into the smart cities, which is the second example, we have also discussed yesterday that there is this sort of dichotomy of efficiency and participation versus large scale surveillance. And it is surprising, because in the if you analyze, for instance, at the Brazilian level, where all the sensors that are distributed around the urban infrastructure, or the processing, the artificial intelligence that is used to predict people's behavior and organize it more efficiently, must be in compliance with already existing legislation and that prescribes security by design. So there is not only a metaphorical principle, is not only a sort of statement of an ideal security by design, is in law. But if you then check in the practice, and we have done this with the study that I was mentioned before, there is almost no use of there is no cybersecurity policy in almost any city council website. And even if there is a specific obligation for the DPO of every municipal government, as the DPO of any other organization, to implement technical and administrative security technique at the top of the possible performance to make sure that data are treated securely. That is really not the case. And even if the DPOs can be personally liable for this, no DPO of any administration in Brazil has ever been sanctioned in the past two years. Now, this is also sort of a frustration. Why? Because even when there is legislation, that is why yesterday I was mentioning in the opening section that even when we have legislation, that is really the first step, because then you have to implement it and implement it correctly. And also, the data protection authorities are really usually a little bit timid with implementation regarding fellow public administrations. So it becomes very tricky to have this concretely in practice. Now, to finalize, a couple of interesting examples from the Brics countries. Again, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There are some very interesting and innovative practices besides a lot of things that we can criticize. Of course, again, everything is freely accessible on this website that I was mentioning before, and especially in this book that we launched this year. Now, the most interesting part that I wanted to speak about, and then I will conclude with this, is the data empowerment and protection architecture. It's something that now will become, well, it has been introduced officially by the latest version of the Indian Data Protection Bill. So it's very interesting to study these countries because they are used to cope with very complex and also developing realities. So they are starting not only to integrate and transplant legislation from Europe and so-called sources of wisdom that we usually all look at, but also creating their own solutions that are more interesting for the developing country reality, such as not only think that when you have a law and a nice authority, the problem is solved and all the economy and society will be automatically regulated. That is actually not really the case because compliance is very difficult. So the Indian approach is to create these consent managers, they are also defined in Article 2 of the last version of the bill, that act as a new category of intermediaries that actually control how your data are accessed by the so-called data fiduciaries, so the data controller and processor of the various corporations or entity, according to what the data subject decides will be the rules. So this is something that, for instance, has been also, is not really rocket science, it's not something very new, because if you think about Solid or by Tim Berners-Lee, or Citizen Me. There are also other examples of private information management systems or private information stores that are this kind of technology that allow you, these dashboards that allow you to control your data. What is very interesting about the Indian example is that this has been introduced into law, national law for 1.5 almost billion people. So that is a very interesting approach, and I think it's very interesting it's fascinating to study also these large developing economies approaches to digital transformation, because there are a lot of things that the so-called developed country can learn from. Now, this is, well, to conclude, the last advertisement is that we had a very nice conference last year about the digital state, where it became, and we are publishing the book next month, it became very interesting that a lot of the initiative about digital transformation is very hype. It's like speaking about, we are doing 5G, we are doing AI, we are doing the fourth industrial revolution, blockchain, omnipresent. But at the end of the day, those are very ephemeral and sporadic, very focused initiative. Very few countries have a strategy, and that is what is most necessary. Strategy, regulation, investment, and I would say also technical standards or technology to complement this. Now, having said that, of course, thank you for your attention, and now I can pass the floor to Laura for her.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the organizers of this conference. I'm really happy to be here. I don't have slides, so we don't have to worry about technical difficulties. So yeah, I'm Laura Bingham, and when I was thinking about what I wanted to focus on for my brief remarks here, I wanted to get a couple of confessions out of the way first about sort of who I am and where I'm coming from. So as Luca mentioned, now I'm directing a new Institute for Law, Innovation, and Technology, and I'm based at Temple University in the United States. I'm a US lawyer, but my past role for about 10 years was as a human rights litigator, and I was based at Open Society Foundations in what's called the Justice Initiative. And my focus area was actually on migration, nationality law, and something called statelessness, which is when someone has no nationality or can't prove that they have a connection to any state. And so what I'm going to do today is to really talk about actually the enforcement of rights protections, legal frameworks that are just now coming into being around data privacy and digital transformation, but from the perspective of someone who's spent a lot of time trying to enforce rights for on behalf of people who actually have no rights or have very little legal recognition of their rights. And I think that this will be relevant to the conversation about data privacy going beyond just getting the regulations in place. Most of my work was also on, because being able to prove aspects of your identity is so important to seeking legal recognition of your legal status, of your rights. Most of my work was engaging with identification systems. So any kind of system that allows someone to have proof of who they are, to be able to prove various aspects of themselves. And now many of these systems are digitalizing or are native digital or so-called. So this connects with smart cities. It connects with many different aspects of digital transformation, because usually a digital ID system, a system that allows everyone, usually, especially in developing countries like India, through biometrics, to be able to say and prove that they are unique. But they can't prove very many other aspects of their identity. And so this is something that I've thought a lot about on behalf of people who are already stateless and who are already living in sort of a state of legal exception. They have no right to have rights. So I just have 3 points, thinking as a lawyer on behalf of those communities and how I would leverage data privacy and the emerging frameworks. And the first is that I think it's important to think of data privacy as actually a multifaceted set of legal tools, not one thing. So you have a substantive layer of that from a rights perspective, right? That is about personal autonomy, juridical personality, being recognized as a person before the law, and having agency and human dignity. These are all really important concepts that are intertwined with the right to privacy. And I'm speaking generally across a lot of different national systems and international human rights. And then you also have structural aspects of digital transformation and data governance that have a lot to do with government structures and the rule of law, and how digitalization is transforming how states work, the digital state, who holds power. Can really distort who is accountable to law. And I think that is also, when we're talking about data governance as an aspect of data privacy, a really important component of that, that it really cuts to democracy and sort of central tenets of how society is organized. But then you have a compliance-based layer that's more practical, that is more tied with concepts of data protection. And I see those elements as more of tactical tools that can be mobilized, and they're all connected. All of these different elements of privacy are connected, but when you're thinking about enforcement, it's really important to deploy them knowing about their sort of strategic and tactical use on behalf of people who are experiencing a variety of different rights violations, right? Not only connected to their information privacy. So just one example, I think maybe that helps to illustrate this, is actually a case that Grace here can talk more about, because it's in the Kenyan context. And there, we had a situation a few years ago where the civil registration systems were going to be replaced, and much of how the government it was going to run was about to be replaced by a digital ID system called Huduma Namba, that at least, in its most essential terms, is very much like the Aadhaar system in India. It's a centralized biometric database that would be used for people to be able to establish a digital identity. And there were a lot of problems with this from the perspective of groups who already had so much difficulty accessing proof of their nationality. So there are a number of groups in Kenya, like the Kenyan Nubians, Kenyan Somalis, other groups with histories of not being recognized as Kenyan or having Kenyanness, either because they have histories of forced displacement or at the initiation of independent Kenya, they were left out of citizenship laws, usually a combination of cultural and linguistic and social and legal factors. What was interesting about how privacy law was used at that moment when the digital ID system was coming online is that actually civil society groups within those communities were the first movers in a court action that used the right to privacy to push back against the rapid enrollment and giving over of biometrics of the entire Kenyan population. And I think that's something that I draw on a lot because I think it was very important about who was enforcing the right to privacy or seeking to enforce the right to privacy. And what that says about what's on the line in privacy-related cases, because as we have evidence, from India, from places where digital ID systems, for instance, have been operating for a lot longer, it can be a life or death situation, basing everything on digital information and the systems that run on that, and running a state based on it can put lives on the line. And that's not always so clearly articulated unless people who have those kinds of stakes are at the forefront of making the arguments. And so that's more or less the second point that I wanted to come to, is that I think that the data privacy advocacy in a lot of places, including in my home country, can learn a lot from what we refer to as movement-based lawyering. So that the core tenet of that practice as a legal representative working on behalf of clients is that you don't set the strategic goals of what you're trying to do with the law. It's communities that are directly impacted, most directly impacted by the violation that you're talking about, who are at the forefront of pushing for change, of pushing for social justice. And that brings with it a structural political analysis, really, about inequality, about what is happening to society and how society needs to change, that takes the conversation about data privacy, for instance, or inequality to another level of narrative and I think making it more compelling. People aren't going to get out into the streets because they want a better risk assessment framework or, like a like a trust services hierarchy or something, I mean, that's not what moves people. And so I think a lot of the data privacy conversation can learn about how law and legal arguments and rights have been leveraged in the service of other movements. And let's see, that I wanted to draw out the link here because this really is about power grabs. All of the conversations on all of these panels, it is about restructuring power dynamics, and the people who have no power and whose rights are not legally grounded right now stand the most to lose. And there's, as Luca was saying, a lot of this is about PR, and terminology that very few people are actually familiar with, even in the legislation. And the way that a lot of digital transformation policies are being adopted is through sort of technical amendments that don't even really they're not subject to public participation. And a lot of the rights enforcement elements are left to regulatory spaces, sort of left aside. That will be, your redress mechanism will be left until later. So all of this, especially for someone who's used to working in areas where state sovereignty is really strong and international human rights or even national laws don't permeate, I see a lot of risks attached to the way that law is being made from the perspective of how are we going to enforce these rights in the future. The last point I want to make is that data privacy also needs to be thought of in relation to other rights. And there, in the Americas, at least in cases around the right to nationality, migration, juridical personality, in the inter-American system, there are really important precedents and there's a practice and a mentality of grouping rights together to really be able to articulate what is actually at stake for the human being. And I think that's another thing that's really important to right here in the region, capture and leverage, to use to say what is really wrong. And the tradition of sort of, in data protection at least, of compliance-based, that sort of compliance, as long as you tick the boxes, everything is okay, corporations or even states are meeting their obligations. Just there's such a gap between that and some of the systemic issues that I'm pointing to. And then I think the last couple of those two more points, one is in other contexts, particularly in the African context, there are traditions about rights that are first and foremost group rights or collective rights, and I think that really can be linked with the data sovereignty or extractivism issues that are connected with the way that digital transformations are taking place at an economic level, right? That should be studied and used in action. And then the last piece is on evidence. When you're trying to enforce rights, the first hurdle, and usually something that cases live and die on, is just lacking evidence that there is a problem. And there, some of the data protection laws that we're talking about have these elements that are like a data protection impact assessment, private rights of action, subject access requests. These tools are also information gathering tools that can be a stepping stone to some of the cases that are more about substantive rights. And so it's, you can almost think of it like a Freedom of Information Act or a right to know law to be used that way in broader legal strategies. I'm sorry if I took a long time. I'm going to stop there.
Just to point out that there are 2 points that really resonate and I think should be stressed. First one, the importance of having this. I mean, it's not only to use the tool of the data protection impact assessment, but to have impact assessment when these kind of digitalization initiatives are put in place, because they may be tremendously effective and efficient. Like during COVID-19 pandemics in India, it was one of the most efficient countries in transferring money to people because everything was electronic. So that was very efficient. But they can also be extraordinarily, they can have extraordinarily nefarious consequences, especially for minorities. For instance, Aadhaar that you mentioned is based on biometrics, and some people, in between 5 and 10% of the population, have digital fingerprints that are not easily readable. So at the very beginning, when Aadhaar was introduced in India, some people could not access subsidies, and I'm not speaking about money, I'm speaking about food rations. So people were starving because they could not be recognized through their digital fingerprints. So it is really something that has a huge impact, and those kind of potential positive or negative externalities have to be considered from the very beginning. And also the collective dimension of privacy that is essential. Because again, Renata was mentioning yesterday in the opening session that we are building basically with digitalization a building that is collapsing, and then we put all the responsibility on the people because they are not wearing their helmets. I think that is really my huge critique towards, I say it as a lawyer, towards privacy law, because it really puts an enormous responsibility on the individual, on the data subject, that it is supposed to know and understand the law and access and use his or her rights. But the enormous majority of data subjects don't even know that the law exists, let alone how to access how to enforce their rights. So it's absurd to digitalize everything, collect data and process data about everyone massively, and then blame people if they don't use their rights. I mean, people, if they have to work 20 hours per day and have not even basic instruction, how can they sue a large corporation or the state because they don't respect their personal data rights, right? So on this injection of optimism, I will I will pass the floor to Gaze.
Thank you so much. As Luca said, my name is Grace Bomu, or Grace Mutumu. I am working with Open Society Foundations on a digital ID project. And so a lot of my thinking about data privacy is from that experience of digital ID. Also, a lot of what I know about digital transformation comes from the experience with digital ID. So I come from Kenya, where we started by, as a country, we like to talk about the things that work for us. One of it is athletics. Please don't try to run with me. I can run very fast. Another one is digital innovation, which is our latest baby, because this is something that started less than 20 years ago. And so there's always been that push to show the power of high tech. In COVID, well, to many people, COVID was a public health emergency. For us, it was also the theater where we could showcase how innovative we are. And I think it's the case for a lot of other countries like India. Let's show how we can use technology. But when you really peel off the layers and ask yourself, what are these digital technologies we are talking about? Are they really ours? In fact, no, they are not. It is yet another transplantation of a way of doing things. And for me, who has had the good fortune of talking to my grandparents, my great-grandparents who lived through colonialism in the last 100 years, that is how they understand what we call the law. It is something that came by ship, and people were told from now on, there's something called the law. Never mind that you are surviving as a society very well without this so-called law, but they were told from now on, this is what we call the law. And in a lot of ways, technology is another tool because even without any laws on digital ID, in Kenya, it got to a point where when you went to the airport, and you're at the airport because you want to go to another country, you'd be told 4 fingers of your right hand, and you'd be like, why do you need my fingers? No, just put them over there if you want to go to another country. So it became another way of doing life. Now in Kenya and a lot of other countries, if you want to get a government service, before it used to be that you needed to pay money, and there would be a law telling you how much money you need to pay. Now it does not matter if you have cash. You need to have that money inside a credit card or on your phone in order to pay for that government service. It does not matter whether you have a phone or not. It does not matter whether you live in a place without internet. That is now how we are doing things. And sometimes you can't even find it in the law. It's just the so-called new and modern way of doing things. So for me, I think there are so many dimensions to look at what we are calling digital transformation. For a lot of people, where these things are being imposed on you without you really having input, it's yet another transplantation of technologies that have been developed elsewhere, coming to mediate your life and your connection or your relationship with the government. And because you need this relationship for your day-to-day life, you have no choice but to settle for what the government has decided is how you're going to be relating. But that is not to say that it's all doom and gloom. I think it's also so interesting how once these technologies land, how people use them. So there are some obviously very negative uses. For example, how the state has become more and more powerful because of these technologies in the name of digital transformation. I think in many countries after COVID, you can name at least 5 impositions of digital technologies into life that from now on we want to be cashless. So we are going to be using, I don't know, mobile money or credit cards. But if you really think about it, it's also a market intervention, because the mobile money and the credit cards don't come from a vacuum. They have been developed and are actually benefiting some companies. It could be in the form of, and I saw this in all the airports I passed through, everybody had to have a QR code, and sometimes you'd have to go and see the supervisor if you don't have your QR code that shows you have been vaccinated or that you have a test. So of course there's the whole aspect of assisting society. Maybe it's much faster if people have this QR code that can be read, but at the same time it's creating a market. And maybe a question is, then who benefits from this market? Who benefits from this digital transformation? Has your life as a citizen of a certain country changed tremendously because of this digital transformation? Probably the changes are, quite minimal, maybe a bit more convenience as you access government services. But in terms of, real change in the quality of life, the school your children go to, or health services, there's still a big gap, and we have to ask ourselves how we could do better. So one of the ways which for me is very interesting is the African conceptions on society. Some people call it Ubuntu, which just basically means I am because we are. So there's that relational aspect, and which is totally different from this rational individual who should have known that they should wear a helmet because the building can collapse. No, it goes to, I relate to my society. I give something to my society, and my society gives me something in return, and we exist because of that relationship. And in many of those, if you look at the literature and the sayings from the communities, it not only has to do with relationship with the living part of the society, but even the non-living part of the society. So it's not just about relating with humans, it's about relating with the whole environment and ecosystem where you live in. And I think this is such a useful way of looking at even privacy, because you are not only looking at this one very narrow aspect of the digital economy, which is me hiding myself and deciding when I can come out, but you are even looking at, by me coming out, does it help us? The common good, the society, does it help us? How does it help us by me not hiding in my private sphere and coming out? Yeah, and how do I benefit? How does everybody benefit? How do we still keep our environment to benefit from this? Because, you know, like in this digital ID systems, a country like Kenya has 50 million people. You want to keep processing the data of 50 million people every time they want to transact with government. And the transactions with government are so many, you know. We were just talking about it earlier that in Kenya, a lot of people use mobile money, yeah. So while mobile money is a transaction between you and a private company, there's also government in between, because under digital ID, government has to come in and verify you. So every time you're going to use mobile money, there's first of all a message that has to go to the government in the government database to verify that you're who you say you are with your card. And then that message comes back to the mobile money operator. Then the mobile money operator can give you your money or can send you money or whatever. So in that whole transaction, if you're thinking about life holistically, you have to ask yourself, okay, if we keep doing this for, of course not the 50 million people in Kenya use mobile money, so let's say maybe 20 million, the adults. If you keep doing that for every adult, what does that mean in terms of even the environment? It means that we need to build huge data centers that take a lot of energy just to sustain this idea that is market-based, that says that let us always be sure that a person is who they say they are, because that is part of digital transformation. We need to know that every time you say you're Luca, that you're really the Luca you say you are, yeah? And because there could be two other Lucas, let's now start using your biometrics. Let's now build a database that stores your biometrics somewhere. And every time you want to use services, we want to test whether your biometrics are the same biometrics you gave us a while back. Never mind that you're growing old. You're not that old. But never mind that physically you keep growing old. So that means that you have to keep, like you're in this process of always updating those biometrics, always creating new technologies for this digital transformation that we are so committed to. And so the question becomes, what should we really, really, as a human race, be committed to? Like, where are our priorities? Yeah. And yeah, it's something to think about even with all this digital transformation, because every time we complain about digital transformation, we are told, oh, okay, we are so sorry that you don't like digital transformation. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring a nice, shiny data privacy law that makes sure that anybody who's coming to access your data does it according to the laws that we've put in place. But I think we need to think beyond just data privacy and think in this more relational interconnectedness, unity of life, and life on the planet in general, not just this rational human being.
Thank you very much, Grace, also for bringing the collective dimension into the picture, and also this very fundamental question, which is, when there is digital transformation, the digital transformation is for whom? Who is gaining out of it? And that is actually, again, a very persistent concern in global South countries, where usually when there are at the start of the debate on digital transformation, there is either a report by McKinsey or the World Economic Forum using Estonia as an example. And with all due respect for Estonia, it's a 1.5 million country that is as big as the Rio de Janeiro municipality, so it's easier maybe there to digitize everything. And also there are different maybe standards of rule of law than other countries in the global South. So it's very important to understand first who is benefiting from this. It can be, again, I think no one here wants to demonize digital transformation. It can be extremely good, and there are a lot of very good potential outcomes, but it all depends on how it is, as everything in life, it depends on what is behind the label and how it is constructed, how it is thought, and not just trying to transplanting what some fancy consulting report may tell you is the world-leading best practices. Now, do we want to have Renata and then Diaseu? Yes. Yeah, Renata. Okay, so Renata, please go. The floor is yours.
Okay, I wanted to be the last because it's always the nicest wrap up. But thank you so much, Lucas, for inviting me. I'm the CEO of Open Knowledge Foundation, and I think that I will move from very theoretical and profound questions on rights and how to enforce those and how to protect those to the practicalities. At Open Knowledge Foundation, we are co-leading together with UNESCO a global project, a very, very complicated project. I think that it has been the most challenging project of my life. Maybe, and it is basically designing how are we going to train the public officers on these issues? Which digital competencies we need to, transfer? How can we design a public sector that is aware and capable of all of this? And it's incredibly complicated because when you see the precarity of the people taking these decisions, and it's not only the precarity, but the limited space, and how when we try to do good in the past, for implementing rules for procurement, for example, trying to tackle corruption, when we try to design rules for going against government waste, when austerity measures were applied to the public sector in the past, how we removed the possibility of having a capable and well-trained and independent and strong public service. Why this is relevant? Because many countries, especially in the global south, when they have to decide for example, which technology they will acquire to process refugee applications, they have 2 or even 3 very bad options. One is to go for the cheapest offer in this. Usually it's not the most ethical company. Usually is, there's even regional schemes where companies they invested a lot in understanding how to trick the systems and push the best bid. And usually in the guidelines that they publish when they are acquiring equipment, considerations of rights are never there. It's just price, it's efficiency, it's how quick this can be deployed. That's the first scenario, rules, very neoliberal rules of avoiding waste, tackling corruption. I want to know everything about the company providing this. I want a very efficient company that will submit all the papers in time, That's one consideration. The second consideration is gifts. We have no regulation when technology is donated. You are facing a crisis. You have refugees coming, and then the fine and friendly company, very interested in the data sets that you are going to receive, comes to the rescue and say, I can help you with this. I can help you installing the system that will, help you solve this problem fast. You're in the middle of a crisis. You're a poor government. Tax cuts pushed by the current government in an imaginary country left you with a budget to deal with this. You have people suffering in front of you, and you just go for it and say, okay, great, take the picture, and you're stuck with these systems forever. The third scenario is even more worrying, and it is when technology is imposed on you. I'm a migrant. I have gone through so many, scans of my 2 hands. I don't know how many biometric pictures I have been taken, for all the visa applications that I have, processed. Every time that I go through a border in so-called developed countries, it is because I have to, to exercise, my right to free movement, I have to go through different technologies imposed on me. And many, many times these technologies are imposed to the countries because of regional security or global security concerns. And so many times that technology is donated but pushed in the agreements of national and international security cooperation, you know. You have to because you have to, and trade deals depend on it, and it's complicated. So like the public sector is left with these technologies that they have to deploy it in the countries, and there's no space for negotiation. Airport security, border security, anti-narcotics, that has been like in Latin America, you have no, I mean, you of course, you have idea how sometimes, you know, like the random search that is never random, and the scan of everything without you even noticing, and how blurred is when these rules of national security or anti-drug enforcement and or even IP is applied to you know, make your rights more vulnerable. So when we are like then we have the contrast, you know, because even if a public officer is super well trained on data privacy, the space of action to make it real in the technologies that they use is very, very, very limited. Another example, education. And then we get into like very complicated terrain with all the education tech. At this time, in parallel, a conference is taking place in Barcelona. I suggest that you follow the hashtag EdTechBCN. And they're discussing precisely that, you know, like the pandemic was an excuse with these two scenarios and a third one of convenience. The first scenario of cheapest technology available, the second scenario of donations, and a third of convenience. Most of the primaries all over the world, like they now have this mediated so-called digital transformation that is transforming into hell for children. And I point at this sector, but it's not a unique case, but it's a case where the most vulnerable are rushed into a technology. And everybody's celebrating because they said, oh my God, so the education sector transformed itself so fast into digital. But without the necessary, all the safeguards that any child protection authority should have been taken, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And these technologies in all the schools are to stay. So that's why I was saying that it's one of the most challenging efforts that we have ever taken, because we can suggest very, very, you know, solid formation on all these problems in the public officers, but they will acquire the skill, and then when they face the reality of I call it superstructures on how the world is shaped, we find that it's is going against a whole system that sometimes we created, as in the case of transparency in the public procurement. So I believe that if we want a future, I believe in the public sector. I think that the state and the state institutions, and especially local state institutions, can make a huge difference. I believe that it's not a matter of very sophisticated training or legal frames. It's a matter of making sure that the laws we dream and the legal frames we dream can be implemented, and that requires three levels. One is let's analyze whether it will be possible to implement the laws that we are pushing forward, and let's identify the blocks in the road to, like the mega blocks in the road to make that implementable. One of the things that I push the most for is developing local capacities inside the government, again, to produce their own technology. And if that's not possible, install capacities locally to develop those technologies. I think that a little bit like we did with food, buying local and consuming local is necessary in the case of the technology that the public sector is going to use. It's fundamental because you can go after them. quicker. You know, like you can, if they are violating privacy, you can hold the local company accountable. You know, I mean, you know, probably like the aunt and the uncle and the children go to school with your children. So if it doesn't touch you, if it's so distant from you, you don't see the harm. And I think that that's one of the problems of big tech, and that's why I'm advocating for smaller local tech. The second thing on the skills, I think that we need to, the austerity and how it is affecting digital transformation needs to it needs to be visible, because often, you know, it's one person in one office dealing with 20 vendors that come with them with very nice things that will make their life simple. And I think that it often is not a lack of competencies and not understanding what the internet is, but it's a reality of overwhelmed public sector that cannot deal with the complexity. And thirdly, I think that we need to remove the task of training the public service away from big tech, because that's another thing that is happening all over the world. You know, digital skill, like be a better teacher by Google, or be a better, like, you know, better at communicator by Facebook, and so on. And if it is a little bit of having, like, you know, like having a McDonald's designing the diet at the health ministry, like it's a little bit like that. So that said, at the Open Knowledge Foundation, we are trying to fix it by developing open curricula for anybody to acquire the skills they need, and developing tech that can be deployable and localized anywhere. One of the examples of that is what we did with Open Data, and SICAN is the gold standard in many, many governments for open data portals. We hope to do similar tools in the future to make sure that we not only give the skills and the tools, but also give the possibility to people to do their own things locally and not depend on gifts, on scams, or on, you know, like they're going here to deploy technologies that are harmful for the citizens. That's it.
Thanks, Renata, for providing these very good examples. And indeed, I mean, we have, I think everyone has read recently the report by the Human Rights Watch report about edtechs being also suggested by multiple governments and de facto having not even basic privacy or data security standards. I think it's very good now to enter more into the Brazilian context. And also, sorry, before we get into the DSR, I think there is another point that I think is fundamental and it's wonderful in the work that Renata is leading at Open Knowledge Foundation, which is capacity building. And again, this is also something that we see a lot in cybersecurity strategies. You may purchase the best encryption tool in the world to secure your service, but then if the human that use it includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 as a password because no one has told him or her, please don't. And it sounds like a joke, but in 2021, this was still the most used password in the world. More than 100 million people use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as password in their devices. So if you, it's very basic information that you have to pass to the human behind the system to just train him and make him or her aware that there are some basic strategies and things that may help you lead with this. So capacity building is central. Dirceu, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thank you very much for the invite. It's a pleasure being here with you guys representing the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP. On a certain perspective, it's good to be the last here on the panel because it gives me the opportunity to learn so much from every other panelists. For example, it's very unique. It's interesting. I've studied the mobile money in Kenya, the M-Pesa, because there are very there's a I wouldn't say a similarity, but when we started when Pix, which sort of an online payment, started being developed here in Brazil, one of the examples that was used in saying like you have to an example of a society that had I would say had it right was Kenya, because they're like, oh, the mobile payments, mobile money in Kenya, M-Pesa, you can reach people which do not require to have a bank, for example. You don't have to go to the bank in order to get your payments, but the system was being developed because of the need of a specific society. So a lot like the Ubuntu that you mentioned. I mean, you develop a system based on a need of a society, and not exactly, for example, on a personal need of a company. Let's say, of course, there are companies involved in this. Let's be honest. We're in the middle of a capitalist society. But on a certain perspective, there are systems that work and do right because people think they're effective, right? For example, using, again, the mobile money example from Kenya, specifically the M-Pesa, right? Did I say it correctly or I spelled it wrong? And you can relate that to something that's happening right now in Brazil, which is Pix, which even though Pix goes through the banks, on a certain perspective, it became a very easy way to make payments and use, and in a sort of perspective, make certain transactions on a, I would say, cheaper and faster platform. For example, and of course, there are privacy concerns even in Pix. I would say, for example, that's the good thing about being the last one, because I can then tell some stories which you might think they're jokes, but they're not. For example, in Brazil, it's this is an actual case. This is we have a professor which is a litigator. She might find it very interesting. There was a family who was trying to get child support. A mother tried to, you know the case, right? They got child support for a child and asked a lawyer. The only thing I know about the father is the number of the cell phone. So what did the lawyer said? I'm going to send him through Pix 1 cent, 1 Brazilian cent, which is the minimal transaction you can do. I guess 1 cent or 1 real. Maybe it would be something, if you guys from the US, would be like sending 20 cents or just a penny. I'm just going to send a penny electronically to him, because then when I send it through the cell phone, I will get his corporate, the CPF number, the corporate registry number that we have in Brazil that's required to open an account. I can learn his name, and with certain information and using other public databases and stuff, I can at least find if he has a bank account, where is his bank account, and maybe if I find him, I can file a lawsuit against him, knowing, well, I know you're the father of the, because you send a message to her saying that you knew you were the father, but you don't want to pay child support. But since you were away, we couldn't be located, it was able to locate him through Pix. So you can say there are data privacy concerns, yes, but, well, I think the society is better when a father pays child support, right? And, I mean, we figure out a way, right?
You got me. I am laughing.
And this is something that's very unique. I was, in a certain perspective, surprised, because I'm a data protection lawyer, so I would say, initially I would say, well, no, this is really awful. I mean, how do you use that? But when you see what was actually the final result, well, this guy was trying to avoid paying child support, right? He was trying to just evade not being located. Well, we figure out a way to do so using the technology that's available right now, and in a certain perspective, well, data protection is respected, because when they filed the lawsuit here in Brazil, like also being a litigator myself, when you file this type of child support claims, they are filed under court secrecy. So it's not like everybody knows who the father is, but of course the lawyer who did this very interesting trick went to the media and said, well, it's how it's the way you do it, and so you can do it. This is very fun. She has a Twitter account. She actually taught people on TikTok how to do the exact same thing. She did a lot of TikToks on it. She's quite famous on TikTok. So this is a little bit about us Brazilians in terms of technology. We're very creative on how to use technology, but on a certain perspective, we for many decades, and Luca has been here in Brazil for a while, and I know you've been here. You mentioned on your presentation yesterday when the opening remarks that you were happy to be here on FGV again. So it's Brazilians are very creative on using technology and even in developing. Yeah.
Privacy. Remember, like the privacy thing.
Yes, but on a certain perspective, we in Brazil are just now learning how to use and understand privacy and data protection as a whole. I would say FGV is probably one of the very few schools in Brazil that has privacy and data protection in their curricula, right? I mean, having Professor Luca here, the best person to guarantee that the students here are exposed or either to with privacy law classes, and we know that that's a developing area here in Brazil. So it's very interesting and unique to see all the different perspectives that people brought here to the room. Also, I have to say that, for example, I know myself that I'm not exactly very protective of my privacy because I use apps such as Tinder. You know, they get my face. They need facial recognition. And I don't have exactly, I'm not going to send a letter to the Tinder like say, oh, please, how are you using my face and so on? Maybe I wouldn't do that. Do I trust the app? Not really, but it's a certain perspective is a way that, you know, I'm trying to get a girlfriend. Well, you know, there's a way to figure things out. So I had to give a little bit of my privacy to get something back, at least to use the service. That's not the proper way of doing things. I mean, we definitely need to find ways to make it clear. We definitely need to, the good thing about this panel, with all due respect, is that we're not going to come up with a lot of answers, but everybody's going to leave here with a lot of good questions to keep it from themselves. What we can, many examples that we brought from everywhere around the world, even from Brazil, India, that the example that Professor Luca brought. There's so many examples in which we will see digital transformation, and in which we probably going to have to figure out how we're going to insert privacy and data protection into this development and make it something that's palatable to everyone. Our colleague Renata, right? They got your name right. You mentioned something that's very interesting about education. We solved the problem and created another problem about, for example, the education. We solved, in a certain perspective, one problem, and then, as Renata mentioned, we created other problems. Now we have to face privacy issues. Now we have other things that we're going to face. And it's important, as Renata mentioned, it's important that some technology needs to be local. Because, for example, if you're dealing with this mega company that's located I don't know where, and is already handling and processing my data and got my video because they wanted to, because we had video classes and somehow needed my facial recognition. Now it's somewhere, I don't know. We even have this in the Brazilian government. I mean, many of us here were Brazilians. We have, we vote, right? Voting is mandatory here. And for you to get your registered to vote, they get your facial recognition. They not only get your fingers, but now they get your face. So on a certain perspective, this is something that I don't know if it's been well rolled out to the Brazilian audience in general. And so this is why, just to make my comments very brief, and this is why it's important to have these types of debates to bring experiences and bring knowledge that you can find throughout in societies that may not be the, let's say, the top in terms of development, but they are creative in terms of solutions. I'm sure we can figure something out. And at the end, the IPPs, we have been working also in this type of debates. We are very interested in how this issue will develop throughout the next few years. It's an important topic for us. And we hope to be around participating in debates such as that here in Brazil, here in FGV, with Luca and all your friendly colleagues and other people from all over the world. We have some of our former fellows here present at the audience, members of our board of directors here. So it's very good to be with you guys again in presence. Thank you so much for the invite, and hope we have time for some debate right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dirceu, for the excellent examples. And actually, they really highlight two fundamental points that are, I think, essential for the debate. First one, the fact when you were speaking about the Brazilians' creativity, I mean, that is not only a Brazilian feature, but my point is how much creativity also in terms of new services that cater for the needs of the local population are we missing, precisely because in Global South we are not betting on creativity from local developers, local startups. And again, my example from the very beginning, where everyone in the Global South has subsidized access to social network, a couple of social networks, and all the rest you have to pay for to access it. And so it's also a huge barrier for creativity from the Global South to compete with enterprises from the Global North. Well, actually, Global North end up being only California, but that is another story. And then the second point that you mentioned about the Tinder anecdote, I think that is wonderful to understand how at the very beginning, the distortion, the perversion of privacy laws, because at the very beginning, consent to give data was thought to be a means to protect the individual. But it ended up over the past 30 years to mutate into a payment system. You waive your right on your data to have a service for not for free. You paid it with a waiver to your data privacy. Be it an individual that is willing to use a certain service, which under the pandemic maybe also become essential for not only, I mean, I'm not speaking about Tinder itself, but of many other digital services that when you are in a pandemic, you are obliged to use. And again, think about why people accepted, billions of people literally accepted the new terms of service of a special social network with the pandemic. If you are locked down and you only have one subsidized social network to communicate, you cannot afford the timing is also interesting, because you can really not afford saying, no, I'm switching to another one, because that is the only way of communicating with society you have.
And
so,
you have your clients.
Exactly, and you have, I mean, it's not only friends. I mean, in the Global South, these couple of social media are essential for virtually anything. And that is, I mean, at the different scale, it's the same thing when government are offered free solutions from corporations, and they're like, well, if my criteria are take the most effective and the cheapest one, and you are telling me you offer it for free, you only have to collect data, I will go for it, because no government has, as in its impact assessment, the criteria. Are we paying it with data? And then in 5 years, we will end up, I mean, we speak a lot about data sovereignty and digital sovereignty. This is the core of data sovereignty, meaning you give up your data now to have a free service, but then you end up understanding in 5 years that the service is not free, that you have digitized your administration, paying a huge amount of, I mean, a huge value, which is not in a monetary value, but is a value on control over data of the population. Now, on this, I would like to open the floor for comments and questions. We still have, as we started with 5 to 10 minutes of delay, maybe we can go until 11:40. I know you, Laura, you will have to go in 5 or 6 minutes.
And I also have another panel.
Yeah, okay, but so I think we are perfectly on time so far, right? Yeah, and so questions. Do we have questions from the audience? Comments, questions? Don't be shy if you have any. Yes, there. We have only one. So we can give you this mic and we can use this.
Hi. First, thank you so much, because I'm learning a lot from all of your speeches. I would just like to make a comment about the creativity topic, because we know that as a population, we are very creative for finding solutions like this one that you mentioned, but the other side is also very, very creative. On the panel yesterday on smart cities, João, which works at the mayor office, he was just mentioning how much data the mayor office already has. And these are data that they have never, ever used before. So we don't know what are the kind of ideas that are coming from it and what kind of public policies that are going to be generated from it. And they might not be things that we are going to really approve or appreciate a lot. And also another comment on privacy. There is a very specific topic that makes me, it gets me thinking a lot, which is the data and privacy which are related to the body of the person, like biometrics. You were just mentioning the example of Indian people who they do not have the fingerprints. And on the other side, we have asylum seekers and refugees getting rid of their fingerprints because they are terrified to be traced back to their original location. So I just wanted to stress how much violent this kind of data collection on the body can actually be. I don't know if you want to respond with any comment, but I would just like to say those things. Thank you very much.
I had one point in relation to the paternity alimony point, and then something on sort of bodily sovereignty, which is also something that is very important to me. So on that, I mean, what the anecdote made me think of also is, I think I ended my remarks talking about evidence and the difficulties with evidence collection, and then we had a lot of panelists talking about corporate accountability and corporate responsibility. And something that you can do in financial investigation is actually just buy a share or have a, for public corporations, so to become a shareholder at the bare minimum and have access to information. So I think that's another, deployment of the same kind of strategy. It's not necessarily because what you get back is going to be actionable in court. It's more of a negotiation tactic. But I think, exactly that kind of creativity is necessary when a lot of what you're doing is in a vacuum, an information vacuum and a legal vacuum. The only comment I have on your point about biometrics and bodily sovereignty is that certainly very much in the United States right now, with the overruling of the constitutional protection around abortion rights and reproductive rights, a lot of people who can become pregnant and anyone who would help them, there's a big conversation about how to protect, not necessarily their biometric information, but all of the information related to how they seek health services, and even when they're not actively seeking abortion, even in cases of miscarriage, and to protect against hardcore criminal enforcement by state authorities. So it really is, that's what I'm trying to say about how much is out on the line in terms of the right to life connected with data and datafication.
Do we have any other, yes, question there? And then I think maybe we can consider, are there any other questions? Otherwise we can take this one, have a final round of comments.
Hi, I have a question for Grace, actually. My name's Lee Matheson. I'm a senior counsel at the Future of Privacy Forum. And I thought you raised a really key point for a lot of us in the policy space with regard to how many people, particularly in the Global South, may view the law as a tool for reform and for change and for assistance as this, sort of hostile force that's imposed outside, with the implications of colonialism and implications of it being not a good thing and not a tool for benefiting individuals. And so my question is, particularly as a person, I freely admit, I am overwhelmingly personally biased as a lawyer to think that when you see abuses in the commercial or the government space, the solution is let's make a law, let's make a regulation, let's have a regulator step into the space and do something better. But for places and for societies where that's not a good solution, what do you think is the better answer? Like, how can people in the policy or civil society spaces help if the best solution isn't, let's make a law, let's make a regulation, because that's not a solution that people we'd be trying to help work with. And I guess tied to that, you also raised the point where oftentimes what the legal space is and what the practice is aren't necessarily related. Where you have these technological tripwires to access to government service, or like particular practices just to fly out of the country that may not be mandated legally. And if law and regulation isn't the solution to changing these problems, what do you think that the best way is to start making progress there without this sort of top-down affirmative neocolonialist perspective on regulation?
Sorry, I didn't see that one coming. But maybe what I'd like to talk about, and it's the beginning of a conversation we can talk more about, is on expertise. Because when I talk about the law, I'm just talking about formal law, because even before colonialism, it's not as if people were just running wild. Believe it or not, there were laws. So, no, that's just a joke. So for me, the issue is what expertise do we value? Because we do live under some law. So what expertise do we value? Do we value other systems of thinking other than this one that is based on the rational man? There are other systems of thinking. You can also think about the rational woman, but even more holistically, we can think about the society and people as relational beings who relate to their society and their environment. So do we value this expertise? Why do we have all the privacy laws being based on a rational individual? And even the human rights system just talks so much about the individual, not about the collective. Can we value that a bit more? Can we think about group privacy? Can we think about collective autonomy? What if a society does not want to be digitized and they are totally fine with it, and their life is actually being sustained by not being digitized? Is there space for that in this new digitized world?
Just under a point that I think it's also not really a allergy to law, but it's the type of law. I mean, I think it's the perspective, the colonial versus organic perspective is something is when a tool of regulation emerges spontaneously from a local culture, or pieces of it are transplanted, but with local characteristics. Something else is when it is imposed, and I think for instance, if you take Latin America, everything is Napoleonic. We have Napoleonic codes of everything because it was not because Napoleon came here and we discussed, but because it was imposed, right? Or if you take Africa, I mean, there are, according to the different colonizers, you have different type of laws. And again, I think no one here believes that society without laws would be fine. I think that Grace's point, and I concur in that, is that it is better. And I think we are, even with data privacy, my point about the Indian law, and I'm going to send you a paper I'm publishing about Brazil, or China, and India, and how they are innovating in terms of data protection. Because there is a lot of things that is happening also in terms of data protection in large developing countries, especially, that reflects their national legal culture and bake them into data protection. If you take India, for instance, the fact that they have very large IT expertise, but also as a large developing countries, they understand that law they are not so overconfident. I think large developing countries, you understand that law is a tool of regulation that may be necessary, but is not necessarily the most effective. So that is also something that is, I think, especially European countries are a little bit too hubristic in thinking that law, once you have the law, you have a nice authority, and then the problem is solved. It's not that easy, especially in countries where the level of development may not be the same, and also the standards of rule of law may not exactly be the same. So I think the point is not say the law is evil. It's a nice, is necessary, frequently tool of regulation, but maybe frequently not the most effective. Now, I see that there are other people coming here for the next panel, so I really think we have to run away. So thank you very much, everyone, for the excellent discussion, excellent presentation, excellent comments.